Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the mining reports floating on his holographic display. The numbers blurred together after 12 hours of reviewing extraction data from Europa's ice drilling operations. Commander Morrison had been stationed on Deep Space Research Station Meridian for 3 years now, and the routine was starting to wear on him. The station orbited Jupiter's frozen moon like a metal tick, constantly monitoring and coordinating the automated mining platforms that carved through Europa's ancient ice, searching for rare minerals. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Jake reached for the cup anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. Outside the observation deck, Jupiter's massive form dominated the view, its red spot glaring like an angry eye through the reinforced, transparasteel windows. The gas giant never failed to remind Jake how small and alone humanity was out here in the void between worlds. A sudden pressure hit Jake's mind like a gentle wave washing against shore. At first he thought it was fatigue, but the sensation grew stronger and more focused. Something was touching his thoughts, probing carefully at the edges of his consciousness with an intelligence that was definitely not human. "Hello," the voice said inside Jake's head, speaking without words in a way that made his skull tingle. "I am Zethkar of the Velnathi Psychic Council. Do not be afraid, Commander Morrison. This contact follows protocols established over many centuries of peaceful first encounters." Jake dropped his coffee cup and it clattered across the metal deck, spilling the cold liquid in dark puddles. His hand instinctively moved toward the emergency alert button on his console, but something about the alien presence made him pause. There was no threat in the mental touch, only curiosity and what felt like professional courtesy. "You can hear me," Zethkar continued, and Jake could sense satisfaction in the alien's mental voice. "Excellent. Your species has developed sufficient psychic sensitivity to warrant formal contact. This is a momentous occasion, Commander. You are the first human to experience telepathic communication with a member of the Galactic Coalition." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to think clearly. First contact protocols demanded that he record everything and notify Earth Command immediately. But something told him this conversation needed to happen first. The alien presence in his mind felt ancient and patient, like speaking with a wise grandfather who had seen countless worlds and species. "What do you want?" Jake thought back, hoping the alien could read his response. "Ah, you learn quickly," Zethkar replied with what Jake interpreted as mental approval. "We seek nothing from humanity except understanding. The Velnathi Empire has guided over 4,000 species into peaceful membership in our coalition. We use our telepathic gifts to establish communication, share knowledge, and prevent the conflicts that arise from misunderstanding." The alien began what felt like a standard mental procedure, gently probing deeper into Jake's consciousness to establish a fuller communication link. Jake felt Zethkar's presence spreading through his thoughts like warm honey, examining his memories and emotions with scientific precision. Then something changed. The gentle probing stopped abruptly, and Jake felt the alien recoil in shock. Zethkar's mental presence flickered like a candle in strong wind, and Jake sensed growing horror from the telepathic entity. "What is this?" Zethkar's voice had lost its calm professionalism. "Your mind, it contains such chaos, such violence. I see wars beyond counting, suffering that serves no purpose, conflicts where victory means only more death." Jake felt the alien rifling through his memories with increasing panic. Zethkar was experiencing fragments of human history through Jake's knowledge and perspective. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans died to slow a massive army. The trenches of World War I, where men charged into machine gun fire knowing they would die. The beaches of Normandy, where soldiers ran towards certain death because someone had to take the guns. But it was not just the grand historical moments that terrified Zethkar. The alien was also experiencing the smaller human struggles that Jake carried in his memory. His grandfather who worked 3 jobs to feed his family during the economic collapse. His sister who fought cancer for 5 years, undergoing treatment after treatment even when the doctors said there was no hope. His friend Pete, who lost both legs in an industrial accident but still got up every morning and went to work at the rehabilitation center, helping other amputees. They fight when there is no chance of victory, Zethkar whispered in Jake's mind, the alien's voice growing weak and strained. They continue when logic demands surrender. They choose pain over peace, struggle over submission. This is not normal. This is not how minds should function. Jake felt a surge of defensive anger, We don't give up because that's what makes us human. We fight when fighting matters even if we lose, and but why? Zethkar's mental scream was building towards something Jake could not understand. Your species charges into battle knowing death awaits. You attempt the impossible as if it were merely difficult. You face extinction and plan counterattacks. Where are your survival instincts? Where is your sense of self-preservation? The alien presence in Jake's mind was becoming increasingly frantic as it encountered more and more examples of human stubbornness. Every sports comeback from impossible odds. Every scientific breakthrough that took decades of failure. Every person who rebuilt their life after losing everything. Every parent who stayed up all night with a sick child. Every teacher who refused to give up on a struggling student. You do not know when to stop. Zethkar's voice was rising to a mental shriek. You have no off switch, no moment when you say enough, no point where you accept defeat. You just keep fighting and fighting and fighting until you win or die, and sometimes you keep fighting even after you die by inspiring others to continue the fight. Jake tried to respond, but the alien's panic was overwhelming the telepathic connection. Zethkar was experiencing the collective unconscious of humanity through Jake's mind, feeling the weight of 10,000 years of human determination to never surrender, never yield, never accept that any problem could not eventually be solved through sufficient effort and stubbornness. This is wrong, Zethkar screamed, no longer speaking in words but broadcasting raw terror across the psychic link. This is impossible. No species survives with minds like this. You should have destroyed yourselves millennia ago or been conquered by the first enemy you encountered. How are you still alive? How do you function? How do you sleep at night knowing you will never stop fighting? The telepathic connection shattered like glass, and Jake felt Zethkar's presence vanish from his mind, leaving behind only the echo of an alien scream that seemed to go on forever. Jake Morrison sat frozen in his command chair for several minutes after the alien presence vanished from his mind. His hands shook as he reached for the emergency communication panel, but before he could activate it, alarms began blaring throughout Research Station Meridian. Red warning lights bathed the corridor outside his office as automated systems detected massive energy signatures approaching from deep space. Dr. Lisa Chen burst through the door to Jake's office without bothering to knock. Her usually neat brown hair was disheveled, and her lab coat hung crooked on her shoulders. As the station's chief xenobiologist, Lisa had spent years dreaming about first contact with alien species, but the panicked expression on her face suggested this was not how she had imagined it would happen. "Commander, we're picking up readings unlike anything in our databases," Lisa said, activating the holographic display above Jake's desk. 16 massive objects just dropped out of what appears to be some kind of faster-than-light travel, about 2 million kilometers from our position. They're maintaining formation but not approaching. It's like they're afraid of something. Jake stared at the tactical display showing 16 enormous alien vessels arranged in what was clearly a defensive formation. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, and their energy signatures were so powerful that Meridian's sensors could barely process the data. But what struck Jake most was their positioning. The alien fleet was not approaching Earth or Jupiter or even Meridian itself. Instead, they hung in space like a pack of wolves that had suddenly encountered something that made them nervous. "Lisa, I need to tell you something," Jake said, his voice still unsteady from the telepathic encounter. "We just had first contact, and I think it went very badly." Before Lisa could respond, the station's communication array activated itself without any input from the crew. A new voice filled the command center, speaking in perfect English but with an accent that seemed to come from nowhere humans had ever been. The voice belonged to someone who sounded tired and very old. "This is Admiral Velthar of the Velnathi Imperial Fleet addressing the humans aboard Research Station Meridian. We request immediate medical assistance for Psychic Council member Zethkar, who has suffered severe mental trauma following contact with your species. Please respond." Lisa looked at Jake with wide eyes. "Mental trauma? What did you do to their psychic?" "I didn't do anything," Jake replied, activating the communication system. "This is Commander Morrison. What kind of assistance do you need?" There was a long pause before Admiral Velthar responded. "Commander Morrison, you were the human who made contact with Council member Zethkar. We must ask, is your mental state typical for your species, or are you somehow unusual among your people?" Jake exchanged glances with Lisa, who was frantically taking notes on everything being said. "I'm pretty typical, I guess." "Why do you ask?" Another pause, this one even longer. When the Admiral spoke again, his voice carried a tone that Jake could only describe as horrified fascination. Council member Zethkar has been placed in medical isolation aboard our flagship. He collapsed immediately after contact with your mind, and has been unconscious for the past 37 minutes. When he briefly regained consciousness, he could only repeat the same phrase over and over. What phrase? Lisa asked, leaning closer to the communication pickup. He keeps saying, they don't know how to stop, they simply don't know how to stop. Our medical staff has never encountered anything like this in over 3,000 years of first contact. Procedures. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he remembered the aliens growing panic during their mental connection. Zethkar had been terrified by something in Jake's mind, something the alien had never encountered before. Jake had felt the telepathic entity recoiling in horror from the memories and instincts that Jake considered perfectly normal. Lisa was already pulling up files on her portable computer, scrolling through decades of research on human psychology and behavior. Admiral Velthar, can you tell us what exactly your psychic encountered that caused this reaction? The Admiral's response came after a consultation that Jake could hear happening in the background, voices speaking in a musical language that sounded nothing like any human tongue. Dr. Chen, our preliminary analysis suggests that human minds contain patterns that are fundamentally incompatible with normal psychological structures. Council member Zethkar reported experiencing what he described as endless loops of defiance and recursive determination matrices that have no termination conditions. Jake had no idea what those terms meant, but Lisa's face had gone pale. As a scientist who studied behavior and psychology, she seemed to understand the implications better than he did. Admiral, when your people encounter a problem that cannot be solved, what do? Lisa asked carefully. We adapt our goals to match available resources naturally. All intelligent species possess survival mechanisms that prevent them from engaging in futile struggles. This is basic evolutionary psychology. Lisa looked at Jake with something approaching wonder and terror. Commander, I think I'm beginning to understand what happened. Humans don't have those survival mechanisms, at least not the way other species do. When we encounter a problem we can't solve, we don't change our goals. We change our methods, find new approaches, get more resources, or simply keep trying until we succeed or die. The communication channel crackled as Admiral Velthar seemed to be conferring with other members of his crew. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been fear. Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that humans lack the psychological mechanisms that prevent engagement in unwinnable conflicts? That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Lisa replied, her scientific excitement overriding her caution. Humans have been selected for persistence and problem-solving rather than knowing when to quit. We have cultural values that specifically reward never giving up, even in hopeless situations. Our heroes are people who fought against impossible odds. Jake heard what sounded like dozens of alien voices speaking at once in the background of the transmission. The discussion grew heated, with several voices rising above the others in what was clearly an argument. Commander Morrison, Dr. Chen, Admiral Velthar said finally, his voice now carrying a tone of formal protocol. By order of the Velnathi High Council, your star system is hereby declared a Class 7 psychological hazard zone. No further telepathic contact will be attempted until we can develop appropriate mental shielding protocols. The transmission cut off, leaving Jake and Lisa staring at each other in the sudden silence. Outside the observation windows, the 16 alien ships began moving into a wider defensive formation, clearly taking no chances with whatever they had discovered about humanity. Lisa collapsed into a chair and stared at her notes.
Jake, I think we just became the first species in galactic history to be quarantined for being too stubborn to quit.
Captain Ben Rodriguez had volunteered for dangerous assignments before, but nothing quite like this. He sat in the station's medical bay with sensors attached to his head, while Dr. Lisa Chen monitored his vital signs from a safe distance. The Velnathi had requested another telepathic contact to better understand what they were dealing with. But this time they wanted to take precautions, remember, Ben? If you feel any discomfort or mental pressure, just say the word and we'll terminate the connection immediately, Lisa said, checking the readings on her instruments. Admiral Velthar assured us they'll keep the contact minimal and controlled. Ben nodded and closed his eyes, trying to relax despite the bizarre circumstances. As the station's head of security, He had trained for hostile encounters and terrorist attacks, but nobody had prepared him for becoming humanity's diplomatic representative to a telepathic, alien species that was apparently terrified of human psychology. The mental contact began as a gentle tickle at the edge of Ben's consciousness. Unlike Jake's experience with the traumatized Zethkar, this touch felt careful and heavily shielded, like someone wearing thick gloves trying to handle dangerous chemicals. "Captain Rodriguez," came Admiral Velthar's voice inside Ben's mind, speaking with extreme caution. "I will maintain minimal contact to avoid the psychological contamination that affected Council Member Zethkar. We need to understand your species before we can determine how to proceed." Ben felt the alien presence barely skimming the surface of his thoughts, afraid to dig deeper. "What do you want to know, Admiral?" "We have studied the records of 4,312 sentient species across this galaxy," Velthar replied, his mental voice carrying the weight of vast experience. "Each species follows predictable psychological patterns. When faced with overwhelming opposition, they negotiate, retreat, or submit to preserve their existence. This is universal survival behavior." Through the limited connection, Ben could sense the Admiral sharing images and memories from other first contact situations. He saw species after species encountering the Velnathi fleet and responding with logical self-preservation. Some tried to fight briefly before recognizing the futility. Others immediately sought diplomatic solutions, and a few simply surrendered without resistance. All of them had clear mental breaking points where survival instinct overrode pride or aggression. Every intelligent species has what we call termination protocols built into their psychology, the Admiral continued. Natural limits that prevent them from engaging in conflicts that will result in their extinction. These mental safeguards are essential for survival and the foundation of all diplomatic relations. Ben was beginning to understand where this was heading, but you didn't find those safeguards in Jake's mind. The Admiral's mental presence recoiled slightly even from this minimal contact. "Captain Rodriguez, when I examine your thoughts, I see the same impossible patterns that traumatized Council Member Zethkar. Your mind contains strategies for fighting when victory is impossible, plans for continuing resistance even after military defeat, and cultural programming that values death before surrender." Ben felt the alien carefully probing his memories of Earth's history, touching on humanity's greatest conflicts with the delicacy of someone handling explosives. The Admiral was experiencing fragments of human warfare and resistance movements through Ben's perspective, but keeping the contact shallow enough to avoid the overwhelming psychological storm that had broken Zethkar. "Here," the Admiral said, focusing on one of Ben's memories. "Your World War II. I see resistance fighters in occupied territories continuing to fight against overwhelming German forces. They knew they would likely die, knew their actions would bring brutal retaliation against civilians, knew they could not win through direct confrontation. Yet they fought anyway. They fought because it was the right thing to do," Ben replied. "Someone had to resist." The Admiral's mental voice carried deep confusion. But the logical response would have been to preserve lives through cooperation until circumstances changed. Why choose certain death over possible survival? Ben tried to explain something that seemed obvious to him, but apparently incomprehensible to the alien. Because if everyone just gives up when things get tough, then the bad guys always win. Someone has to be willing to fight even when fighting seems hopeless. Through their connection, Ben felt the Admiral sharing this exchange with other members of the Velnathi leadership. The discussion that followed was intense and rapid, conducted in their musical language but accompanied by emotional undertones that Ben could sense through the telepathic link. The aliens were deeply disturbed by something they were discovering about human nature. "Captain Rodriguez, we are going to share with you the psychological profiles of several species to help you understand why your people are so unusual," the Admiral said after the consultation ended. Images flooded Ben's mind, carefully filtered through the Admiral's consciousness to avoid direct mental contact. He saw the Karani, a species of tall, graceful beings who had developed advanced mathematics and stellar engineering. When the Karani encountered problems they could not solve, they simply accepted the limitations and found different goals. Their minds had natural stopping points that prevented them from wasting resources on impossible tasks. Next came the Thorvik, a warrior race that had conquered dozens of star systems through superior military technology. But even the Thorvik had psychological limits. When they faced enemies they could not defeat, they would retreat, regroup, and seek alternative strategies. If no alternative existed, they would negotiate or even submit temporarily to preserve their species for future opportunities. The Admiral showed Ben dozens of other species, each with their own unique psychology, but all sharing the same fundamental characteristic. Every single species had mental mechanisms that recognized futile struggles and redirected their efforts toward achievable goals. Now I will show you what we see when we examine human psychology, the Admiral said, and Ben felt a chill of anticipation. The images that followed were different from the other species profiles. Instead of neat logical thought patterns with clear boundaries and stopping points, Ben saw his own mind as the aliens perceived it. Human consciousness appeared to them as an endless maze of contingency plans, backup strategies, and what-if scenarios. Where other species had mental off switches, humans had only more pathways leading to more attempts at solutions. You plan for failure by creating new plans, the Admiral observed with something approaching awe. When Plan A fails, you implement Plan B. When Plan B fails, you create Plan C through Z. When all 26 plans fail, you start over with Plan AA. Your minds contain no concept of a truly impossible task, only tasks that require more creativity or persistence. Ben was starting to understand why the aliens found humanity so terrifying. You're saying that other species know when to quit, but we don't. More than that, Captain Rodriguez, your species appears to be psychologically incapable of accepting permanent defeat. You treat every setback as a temporary obstacle and every failure as a learning experience. This is not normal. This is not how intelligent minds are supposed to function. The Admiral's mental presence was growing agitated, despite the careful shielding. Do you understand what this means for galactic stability? If humans spread throughout the galaxy with this psychology, you will never stop expanding, never accept boundaries, never acknowledge that some resources or territories belong to others permanently. You will keep pushing and fighting and adapting until you either control everything or destroy yourselves trying. Ben felt a surge of defensive pride. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe the galaxy needs someone who won't give up when things get difficult. The Admiral's response came with a wave of terror that made Ben's head spin. Captain Rodriguez, there is something out there that even we fear, something we have been fleeing from for over 1,000 years. We will speak more about this tomorrow, but first we must consult with our High Council about what to do with your impossible species. Jake Morrison found himself standing in what appeared to be a perfect recreation of Research Station Meridian's command center, but something felt wrong about the whole situation. The colors were too bright, the sounds too crisp, and when he looked out the observation windows, Jupiter hung in space with mathematical precision that nature never achieved. Dr. Lisa Chen had explained that the Velnathi wanted to conduct an experiment to understand human psychology better, but she had been vague about the details. Commander Morrison, came Admiral Velthar's voice from speakers that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. You are now inside a virtual reality construct designed to test the limits of human problem-solving behavior. We need to understand what conditions would cause your species to accept defeat and seek alternative solutions. Jake touched the control panel in front of him and felt the strange sensation of simulated electronics responding to his commands. What kind of test exactly? You will face a series of scenarios involving impossible odds and no-win situations. We want to observe at what point your psychological patterns recognize futility and adapt to new objectives. This is standard procedure for understanding alien psychology. The simulation began with Jake receiving a distress call from a mining colony on Europa's surface. According to the sensors, a massive solar flare had damaged the colony's life support systems, and they had less than 6 hours of breathable air remaining. The transport shuttles were all damaged beyond repair, and the station's emergency pods could only carry half the colonists to safety. Jake immediately began calculating rescue options. He could strip life support components from non-essential station systems to extend the colony's air supply. The mining equipment could be converted into makeshift transport vehicles. If he overloaded the station's power systems, he might be able to boost the transporters beyond their normal range limitations. Interesting, Admiral Velthar observed as Jake implemented his solutions. You are attempting to solve multiple problems simultaneously, rather than choosing which colonists to save. Within the simulation, Jake's improvised solutions worked. The colony's life support held long enough for him to jury-rig transportation for everyone. But as soon as that crisis ended, a new one began. Hostile alien ships appeared and began attacking both the station and the colony. Jake found himself fighting a battle he could not possibly win against enemies with superior technology and overwhelming numbers. Instead of surrendering or retreating, Jake began looking for weaknesses in the enemy formation. He used the station's mining lasers as improvised weapons, set up ambushes using the asteroids in Europa's orbit, and even rammed one of the smaller enemy ships with a cargo hauler loaded with explosive mining charges. Commander, you are facing an enemy with 10 times your firepower and advanced shields that your weapons cannot penetrate, the Admiral pointed out. The logical response would be to signal surrender and attempt to negotiate. I'm not done fighting yet, Jake replied, using the station's emergency beacon to call for help, while simultaneously planning his next attack. There's always something you can do. The simulation escalated. Jake's distress call was answered, but the rescue fleet was also destroyed. Earth sent reinforcements, but they too were defeated. The enemy forces grew larger and more advanced with each wave, until Jake was commanding the last human outpost in a galaxy where his species was being systematically exterminated. Even then, Jake kept fighting. He developed new tactics, found ways to hurt the enemy even while losing, and made plans to hide survivors who could continue the resistance after his inevitable defeat. When the simulation destroyed his ships, he fought from the ground. When it destroyed his ground forces, he organized guerrilla warfare. When it killed most of his people, he planned ways for the survivors to strike back. This is remarkable. Admiral Velthar's voice carried a mixture of fascination and horror. I have been running this simulation for what would be equivalent to 6 months of real time. You have lost every major battle. Your species has been reduced to a handful of refugees hiding in asteroid belts, and you are still developing new strategies for victory. Jake paused in his planning to address the alien observer. Of course I am. Just because we're losing doesn't mean we should stop trying to win. The simulation shifted again. Now Jake was facing not just military defeat but natural disasters, plagues, equipment failures, and betrayals from allies. Every solution he found led to 3 new problems. Every victory was temporary and cost more than it gained. The virtual reality construct threw impossible scenario after impossible scenario at him, each one designed to break his will to continue. But Jake kept adapting. When direct confrontation failed, he tried stealth. When stealth failed, he tried negotiation. When negotiation failed, he tried sabotage. When sabotage failed, he tried biological warfare. When biological warfare failed, he tried psychological manipulation. The simulation had to keep creating new types of problems, because Jake refused to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Commander Morrison, I must ask you directly, Admiral Velthar said after Jake had been fighting for what felt like years of virtual time. At what point would you consider surrender to be the rational choice? Jake thought about this question while coordinating a desperate assault on an enemy fortress using weapons cobbled together from farming equipment and mining tools. I guess when there's literally nothing left to try, but even then I'd probably spend some time making sure I hadn't missed anything. And when would you reach that point of having nothing left to try? Jake paused his attack, planning to consider this seriously. I honestly don't know. There's always something. Change your approach, find new allies, look for weaknesses you missed before, wait for circumstances to change. Try something that seems impossible but might work anyway. Even if I was the last human alive hiding in a cave somewhere, I'd probably be planning some way to get revenge or make sure my death caused problems for whoever killed everyone else. The simulation suddenly froze around Jake, leaving him standing in a motionless tableau of his latest desperate battle plan. Admiral Velthar's voice returned, but now it carried something that sounded like genuine fear. Commander Morrison, I am terminating this experiment. We have been observing your psychological patterns for the equivalent of 18 months of subjective time, and you have not even approached what we would consider a breaking point. Your mind continues to generate new solutions and strategies regardless of how hopeless the situation becomes. Jake felt reality shifting around him as the virtual construct began to dissolve. So what does that mean? It means, Commander, that your species possesses something we have never encountered before. You have what can only be described as psychological immunity to despair. Other species have limits to their determination, boundaries beyond which they will not go. You appear to have no such boundaries. As the simulation faded completely, Jake found himself back in the medical bay on Research Station Meridian with Dr. Lisa Chen and Captain Ben Rodriguez, watching him with concerned expressions. "Jake, are you all right?" Lisa asked, checking the monitoring equipment. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours, but the neural activity readings were unlike anything I've ever seen." Before Jake could answer, Admiral Velthar's voice filled the medical bay through the communication system. "Commander Morrison, Dr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez, please prepare for an important discussion. We need to tell you about the Devourers." The main holographic display in Research Station Meridian's command center showed images that made Jake Morrison's blood run cold. Entire star systems reduced to empty space, planets stripped down to their rocky cores, and the twisted remains of what had once been thriving civilizations. Admiral Velthar's voice carried the weight of 1,000 years of running and hiding as he explained what the humans were seeing. "We call them the Devourers because that is all they do," the Admiral said, his mental voice reaching Jake, Lisa, and Ben through carefully shielded telepathic contact. "They appeared in our galaxy approximately 3,000 years ago from somewhere beyond the galactic rim. They consume everything in their path, converting matter into more of themselves, and they have never stopped expanding their territory." Dr. Lisa Chen studied the tactical displays with growing horror. The Devourers' advance across the galaxy followed a pattern of systematic destruction that left nothing behind. "How many species have they eliminated?" "Over 2,000 confirmed extinctions," Admiral Velthar replied. "Perhaps twice that number if we count the civilizations that simply vanished without sending distress calls. The Velnathi Empire has been retreating before them for over a millennium, evacuating entire sectors as they approach." Captain Ben Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair, studying the enemy's movement patterns. "What exactly are we dealing with here? Some kind of hive mind? Robot army? Biological plague?" The display shifted to show closer images of Devourer forces, and Jake felt his stomach clench at what he saw. The enemy appeared to be a combination of organic and mechanical components, ships that looked grown rather than built, and weapons that seemed to adapt and evolve during combat. Each Devourer construct was unique, as if the enemy learned from every battle and incorporated new capabilities into their forces. "They are something beyond our understanding," Admiral Velthar explained. "Not fully organic, not fully mechanical, but something that transcends both categories. They assimilate the technology and biological characteristics of every species they encounter, becoming stronger and more adaptable with each conquest." Lisa pulled up her research files on human military history, comparing the Devourer expansion patterns to conflicts she recognized. "Admiral, have any species ever successfully fought them to a standstill?" The long pause before the Admiral answered told them everything they needed to know. "Several species have managed to delay the Devourers temporarily. The Corvani held out for 50 years using advanced shielding technology. The Zenthari fought a guerrilla campaign for over a century, using their natural camouflage abilities. But in the end, every species that has faced the Devourers has either been completely destroyed or forced to flee their home systems." Jake studied the tactical data, looking for patterns in the enemy's behavior. "What's their standard approach to conquest?" "The Devourers send advanced scouts to study a species' military capabilities and psychological responses. Then they launch overwhelming attacks designed to break the enemy's will to resist. Most species surrender when they realize the futility of fighting, at which point the Devourers offer them a choice between immediate destruction or gradual absorption into their collective consciousness." Ben felt a chill run down his spine. "And most species choose absorption over extinction?" "Every species chooses absorption when faced with certain death," Admiral Velthar confirmed. "It is the logical survival response. The absorbed populations retain some individual identity while becoming part of the Devourer network, contributing their knowledge and abilities to the collective. It is not pleasant, but it is preferable to complete annihilation." Jake looked at his companions and saw the same realization dawning in their eyes. "But humans wouldn't choose absorption, would we?" The Admiral's mental voice carried a mixture of admiration and terror. "Based on our psychological analysis of your species, we believe humans would choose to fight until complete extinction rather than surrender their individual identity. This is why we are so disturbed by your mental patterns. The Devourers depend on the logical surrender of their enemies, but logic appears to play a limited role in human decision-making. Lisa was already working on her computer, pulling up historical examples of human resistance movements. Admiral, what would happen if a species refused to surrender and kept fighting even after military defeat? It has never happened before. Every species eventually recognizes the impossibility of victory and seeks to preserve what they can through negotiation or submission. The Devourers have never encountered truly suicidal resistance. Jake stood up and walked to the observation window, staring out at Jupiter's massive form while his mind raced through possibilities. What if suicidal resistance isn't actually suicidal? What if there are ways to hurt the Devourers that nobody has tried because other species give up too quickly? Admiral Velthar's response carried a note of desperate hope. Commander Morrison, that is precisely what the Velnathi High Council believes. Your species' psychological immunity to despair might allow you to discover weaknesses or strategies that we have never considered because we always seek rational solutions to our conflicts. Ben was studying the Devourer movement patterns, looking for anything that might suggest vulnerability. They've been expanding for 3,000 years, but they're not moving as fast as they could be. Why? They pause to fully integrate each conquered species before moving on to the next target, the Admiral explained. Complete absorption takes time, and they seem to prefer thoroughness over speed. Jake felt something clicking into place in his mind, the same feeling he got when solving complex engineering problems. What if that's their weakness? What if someone could force them to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, make them rush their absorption process, maybe even rescue some of their absorbed populations? Lisa looked up from her research with excitement in her eyes. Jake, you're thinking about this like a human problem instead of an alien problem. Every species they've faced has tried to defend their home territory and protect their population centers. But what if instead of defending, someone went on the offensive, attacking their supply lines, hitting their research facilities, forcing them to spread their forces thin instead of concentrating on one target at a time? Ben added, his military training taking over the tactical analysis. Admiral Velthar's mental presence was growing stronger, his telepathic shields dropping slightly in his excitement. The High Council has been considering this possibility for decades, but we lack the psychological resilience to implement such strategies. The casualty rates would be enormous, the chances of success minimal, and the risk of complete species extinction nearly certain. Jake turned back to face his companions with a grin that would have terrified any rational species. Admiral, you just described a typical Tuesday for humans. We specialize in long odds and high casualties. The Admiral's response came with a wave of emotion that felt like relief mixed with terror. Commander Morrison, Dr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of the Velnathi Empire and the surviving free species of this galaxy, I am authorized to make you an offer. We will provide humanity with advanced technology, star charts showing devourer positions, and intelligence gathered over 3 millennia of running and hiding. Ben leaned forward. And in return? In return, humanity does what no other species has been willing or able to do. You fight the devourers not to defend your territory, but to drive them back. You take the war to them instead of waiting for them to come to you. You show the galaxy what happens when an unstoppable force meets a species that doesn't know how to stop. Jake looked at Lisa and Ben, seeing the same determination in their eyes that had terrified Zethkar during that first telepathic contact. Admiral, you don't need to give us anything. Just show us where these devourers are and we'll figure out how to stop them. Admiral Velthar's mental laughter carried 3,000 years of accumulated hope. Commander Morrison, that response is exactly why we believe humanity might be the galaxy's salvation. You just volunteered your entire species for a war against impossible odds without hesitation, negotiation, or request for guarantees of success. Jake shrugged. Someone has to do it, and it sounds like we're the only ones crazy enough to try.